This is Valley News Live at 10.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nishay Taylor. A dozen people were detained after U.S. Border Patrol agents intercepted a smuggling attempt. Last month, a Border Patrol agent received a tip that two vehicles had unlawfully entered the country near Roseau. The agent later caught up with one of the drivers of the two vehicles at a gas station near Grigla, where 4 people were taken into custody. The next day, an International Falls Border Patrol agent found the second vehicle unoccupied at a restaurant in Bemidji. 8 other illegal migrants were later located. Out of the 12 detained, 8 were from Great Britain and 4 were citizens of Ireland. Today we hit temperatures in the upper 60s for most of the region, but will it stay warm or will we fall right back into those brisk days? Jim is here now with details. Jim.
Hey Nishay, that's right. Today was another warmer day here in the valley, unlike yesterday and the past few where it was pretty chilly. But right now we're looking at our Dakota Magic Skycam where the wind is blowing those flags all right after the sun has set here in the valley. We're seeing temperatures with most people in the 40s. There are a couple 50s out there. Fergus Falls at 52, Alexandria and Oaks both at 50, but our cold spot right now is Langdon up there along the border at 41 degrees. And Baudette actually is at 39 as well, so things are starting to cool off outside. Here we're seeing mostly clear skies. We do have some clouds passing along the sky there in North Dakota, but everyone in Minnesota is seeing pretty clear skies at this hour, and if we zoom out and look at the whole country, things are pretty quiet. We do have some showers and some storms down in the desert southwest, but that's not causing them much issues at this hour. But I'll let you know how long we expect this warm weather to continue and when cold is back in the picture coming up in a few minutes.
All right, thanks so much, Jim. 5 people were hurt this morning after 2 crashes near 25th Street and 13th Avenue South. First crash, authorities say an SUV ran a red light before striking a pickup truck. The pickup then spun out into the intersection, causing it to collide with a MAT bus. A MAT bus passenger and the SUV's driver suffered minor injuries. The driver of the pickup was also injured. While on the scene, police responded to another crash at the same intersection where an SUV rear-ended a pickup truck. Both drivers of that crash had minor injuries. Several people gathered at the town square in downtown Grand Forks to rally for reproductive rights as an ongoing discussion continues around abortion since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It's also a part of a national rally called Women's Wave. Valley News Team's Aaron Walling has the story.
Nearly 3 dozen people gathered in downtown Grand Forks in support of women's reproductive rights.
Of course, it's fighting for women's rights to choose with what they want to do for their body.
It's been an ongoing battle since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade earlier this year.
It's wild that here we are today fighting for a right that our mothers and our grandmothers fought for when we should be fighting for the future of this nation.
North Dakota is one of many states that are in legal battles over the potential bans of abortions. Joined by some local politicians, the group is advocating the right to a woman's body and health care. Overall, those in attendance just say the rally shows unity for the cause.
I believe that coming together and showing solidarity is how we make change in this country. This is what democracy is about. When the people come together to express their concerns, they have the right to show up and speak to lawmakers.
Hands off our bodies!
In Grand Forks, Aaron Walling, Valley News Live.
The case of the 2007 killing of Minot College student Anita Knudson has recently drawn national attention, including a special 2-part investigation on the show Cold Justice. Those from the show visited Minot earlier this year and met with investigators as well as Anita's family and friends. Last Saturday, the investigators on the show laid out the foundation of the case and narrowed the list of suspects. Part 2 of the show took a closer look at the crime scene, Anita's off-campus apartment. The 18-year-old was found fatally stabbed in June of 2007, and the case went cold until this year, when police arrested Nicole Rice, the woman who was Anita's roommate at the time of her death.
Anita Knudson was such a pure victim, such a young girl that had so much ahead of her, that I think every parent who watches this show and sends their kids off to college have got to have that lump in their stomach and just pray to God this doesn't happen to them.
Rice will be back in court in late December. Trial dates have not been set as of yet. Dozens of families came out to celebrate the grand reopening of Gigis Playhouse in Fargo, the state's only Down Syndrome Achievement Center. Gigis burnt down nearly a year and a half ago from arson, but today families celebrated their second home opening again. The national founder of the Playhouse flew into Fargo to join the celebration. She says it's one of the best Down Syndrome Achievement Centers in the nation. After a short presentation and dance party, people later explored the new space. Free programs for people with Down syndrome of all ages start on Monday. More than 1,100 unbelted drivers in Minnesota were cited during the latest Click It or Ticket campaign. So far this year in the state, 61 people have died due to not wearing their seatbelt. The Minnesota Department of Public Safety says 27 child seat citations were also given during the campaign's run back in September. North Dakota's 5 American Indian tribes are seeking exclusive rights to host internet gambling and sports betting in the state. It's a monopoly that could be worth millions. The tribes are turning to Governor Doug Burgum to approve the idea under tribal state agreements known as compacts. The tribes argue their casinos have been hurt by the explosion of electronic pull tab machines statewide after they were legalized in 2017, with North Dakotans pouring almost $1.75 billion into the machines in this fiscal year. Common Spirit, one of the largest hospital chains in the U.S., was hit with a suspected ransomware cyber attack this week. This delayed surgeries, holdups in patient care, and rescheduled doctor's appointments across the country. Common Spirit declined to share specifics, but a person familiar with its remediation efforts confirmed there was a ransomware attack. Common Spirit is the parent company for 140 hospitals across the U.S., including St. Alexia's Health in Bismarck, Lakewood Health Center in Baudette, and St. Joseph Health in Park Rapids. Facebook's owner Meta is warning that as many as 1 million users may have had their login information stolen. Meta researchers discovered more than 400 malicious Android and Apple apps designed to steal personal Facebook logins. A Meta spokesperson says the company is reaching out to the users who may be at risk. The malicious apps are disguised as games, photo editors, health and lifestyle services. A Google spokesperson says the apps that have been identified as part of the scam are being removed from Google Play. You could soon pay more to send mail. Later on Valley News Live at 10, USPS is planning to raise its prices.
And temperatures across the valley are cooling off nicely. We are showing most people in the 40s, though there are some 50s down south, which is a lot warmer than this time yesterday, with a lot of people sitting at about 10 to 15 degrees warmer today than yesterday, though earlier a lot of those numbers topped out at about 25 degrees warmer today than yesterday. I'll have how long this warm weather will continue coming up next.